Sir, you have a metal object on you. Please remove it for inspection.
This is no ordinary metal object, young lady. This is my Medal of Honor.
Airport security denied Medal of Honor. Winner access. Air Force One landed for personal apology. When 87-year-old Colonel Robert Tank Sullivan arrived at Reagan National Airport wearing his Medal of Honor, TSA Chief Janet Morrison saw only a suspicious metal object. Her demand to confiscate it would trigger a Pentagon response that shut down the security checkpoint within 2 hours. Reagan National Airport's Terminal A buzzed with its usual Wednesday afternoon energy as travelers hurried through security checkpoints. The iconic view of the Potomac River and Washington Monument through floor-to-ceiling windows provided a patriotic backdrop to the controlled chaos of American air travel, while TSA agents Colonel Robert Tank Sullivan stood patiently in the security line, his Medal of Honor displayed proudly on the lapel of his dress blue uniform. At 87, he carried himself with the ramrod posture of a man who had led Marines through 3 tours in Vietnam, earning the nation's highest military decoration for single-handedly destroying 4 enemy bunkers while under heavy fire during the Battle of Khe Sanh. The Medal of Honor around his neck wasn't costume jewelry. It was the actual decoration President Johnson had placed there in a White House ceremony 56 years ago, when Tank had been a young captain with shrapnel scars still healing on his arms. The star-shaped medal represented not just his own courage, but the sacrifice of 37 Marines in his company who hadn't made it home. Tank was traveling to his granddaughter's wedding in San Diego, his first flight in 5 years. Sarah had specifically requested that he wear his Medal of Honor during the ceremony. "I want everyone to know what kind of hero raised my daddy," she'd said, making the old Marine's eyes water with pride. The uniform still fit, though Tank had to admit it was snugger than in younger days. Tank had flown many times since retirement, usually in civilian clothes to avoid attention. He'd researched TSA procedures for Medal of Honor recipients, knowing his decoration was specifically exempted from standard security restrictions. What he couldn't have anticipated was encountering Janet Morrison, a TSA chief who had been promoted 6 months earlier after her predecessor was disciplined for being too lenient with passenger screening. Morrison was relatively new to airport security, having transferred from a smaller regional facility where Medal of Honor recipients were virtually unknown. Recent security briefings had emphasized the importance of questioning all passengers, regardless of claimed status or documentation, and she was determined to prove her competence through strict enforcement of every protocol. The opportunity to attend Sarah's wedding had come as a surprise. Tank's health had been declining, and his family had assumed he couldn't travel. But when Sarah called personally to ask him to walk her down the aisle in place of her deceased father, Tank couldn't refuse. "Grandpa Tank," she'd said, "I want you to give me away wearing the uniform that made Daddy so proud." The decision to travel in uniform had been carefully considered. Tank's son, Major David Sullivan, had been killed in Iraq 15 years earlier, and the family's military tradition would end with Tank's generation. Wearing the Medal of Honor to Sarah's wedding felt like passing the torch, honoring both his son's memory and the values that had shaped their family. Tank's preparation reflected his military attention to detail. He'd researched airline policies for passengers wearing military decorations, confirmed Medal of Honor exemptions, and even called Reagan National to notify them of his status as a Medal of Honor recipient traveling in uniform. He'd packed his medications carefully, arranged wheelchair assistance for longer corridors, and scheduled extra time for any additional screening. The uniform itself required careful preparation. Every ribbon was positioned precisely, every button polished to mirror shine. The Medal of Honor hung exactly where regulations specified, 1 inch below the left lapel notch. The blue ribbon adjusted for proper length. Tank understood that his age and decorations might require explanation, and he was prepared to be patient with agents unfamiliar with military protocols. The initial approach went exactly as expected. Tank presented his military ID and boarding pass to the document checker, who immediately noticed the Medal of Honor. "Sir, thank you for your service. You can use the priority lane," the young agent said respectfully. Tank nodded his appreciation and moved toward the metal detector, knowing his decorations would set it off, but confident the process would be routine. But TSA Chief Janet Morrison had been monitoring from her supervisor station, and she noticed what appeared to be valuable metal objects that could pose security risks. Morrison had been promoted after her predecessor was criticized for insufficient scrutiny of passengers with special circumstances, and she was determined to demonstrate rigorous enforcement regardless of claimed exemptions. "Hold on," Morrison called out, approaching with determined authority. "Sir, you'll need to step aside for additional screening. Those metal objects require special inspection." Her tone immediately transformed routine security into an adversarial encounter that caught Tank off guard. Tank maintained composure, drawing on decades of experience with military and civilian bureaucracy. "Of course, ma'am. This is the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest military decoration. I have my military ID and documentation if you need verification." He spoke with the patient respect that had served him well throughout his career. Morrison examined Tank's military ID with obvious skepticism, though it clearly identified him as a Medal of Honor recipient. "ID appears legitimate," she acknowledged, "but these metal objects still need inspection according to current security protocols. I'm not familiar with exemptions for this type of military decoration." Her statement revealed gaps in training that concerned veteran TSA agents. One approached quietly. "Ma'am, that's the Congressional Medal of Honor. There are specific protocols in our manual for Medal of Honor recipients." Morrison bristled at being corrected by her subordinate. "I'm aware of our protocols. My responsibility is passenger safety, and military decorations are still metal objects requiring inspection." Morrison's raised voice began attracting attention from passengers in multiple security lines. Travelers slowed their movement, whispering among themselves as they recognized the distinctive blue ribbon and star-shaped medal. A businessman approached the checkpoint supervisor. "Excuse me, but that gentleman is wearing the Medal of Honor. Surely this doesn't require such extensive questioning." The situation drew attention from Airport Police Officer Maria Rodriguez, a Navy veteran who immediately recognized both Tank's decorations and the inappropriate nature of his treatment. Rodriguez approached Morrison with professional concern. "Ma'am, Colonel Sullivan is a Medal of Honor recipient. Our standard procedure is expedited screening with appropriate courtesy." Morrison found herself facing scrutiny from colleagues and passengers, but rather than backing down, she doubled down on her authority. "Officer Rodriguez, TSA protocols take precedence over courtesy considerations. This passenger will be screened according to standard procedures regardless of claimed exemptions. Officer Rodriguez's intervention brought additional airport personnel into the situation. The terminal's operations manager approached with diplomatic concern. Perhaps we could handle this in our private screening area to avoid any inconvenience. For a moment, reasonable compromise seemed possible. The private room was designed for passengers with special circumstances. But Morrison wasn't interested in compromise. Whether driven by stubbornness or misguided dedication to security, she made a decision that would define her career. "No," she declared loudly, "military decorations are not exempt from inspection. If this passenger wants to fly, he'll remove all metal objects for separate examination." The statement was both factually incorrect and procedurally inappropriate. Federal regulations specifically exempted Medal of Honor recipients from certain requirements, and Morrison's demand violated both TSA policy and basic respect for military service. Tank found himself caught between compliance and protection of his most sacred possession. Morrison's demand created a standoff that brought security operations to a halt. Other agents stopped routine tasks to observe the unprecedented situation, while passengers in multiple lines began backing up, creating congestion affecting terminal operations throughout the concourse. "Ma'am," Tank said, addressing Morrison with respectful firmness, "I've worn this medal to the White House, the Pentagon, and every major military installation in America. It's never been treated as a security threat." His voice carried quiet authority of someone who had earned respect through service and sacrifice. Morrison's response revealed dangerous ignorance combined with bureaucratic power. "Sir, I don't care where you've worn it. My checkpoint, my rules. Remove the metal objects or find another way to travel." The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge to everything Tank's decoration represented. Morrison's ultimatum hit the checkpoint like a shockwave. She was demanding that an 87-year-old Medal of Honor recipient remove the nation's highest military decoration and submit it for inspection like common jewelry. The request was not only insulting, but revealed fundamental ignorance about what she was confronting. "Absolutely not." Officer Rodriguez intervened immediately, her voice carrying authority of someone recognizing a career-ending mistake in progress. "Ma'am, you cannot require a Medal of Honor recipient to remove his decoration. It's protected under federal law and TSA exemptions." But Morrison was beyond reason, driven by pride and complete misunderstanding of her authority. "Officer Rodriguez, I'm in charge of security at this checkpoint, and I determine what constitutes a potential threat. Military decorations could conceal prohibited items." Tank stood frozen, processing Morrison's demand. She wanted him to remove the Medal of Honor, the symbol of his Marine sacrifice, the recognition of his nation's gratitude, the most sacred thing he possessed, and hand it over for inspection like a belt buckle. This was Tank Sullivan's defining moment. He could comply with Morrison's inappropriate demand, teaching every witness that America's highest military honor meant nothing when confronted with bureaucratic authority. Or he could stand firm and face whatever consequences came with protecting his most sacred possession. Standing in that crowded terminal, Tank made a decision that would be remembered by everyone present. "No, ma'am," he said quietly, but with unmistakable authority of someone who had earned the right to be heard. I will not remove my Medal of Honor. The word no seemed to reverberate through the terminal. Passengers stopped moving, phones came out to record what was happening, and airport workers paused to witness the confrontation. Morrison stared at Tank in shock, clearly having expected compliance rather than principled resistance. "Then you're not flying today," Morrison declared, reaching for her radio. "And you may face federal charges for interfering with security operations." Her threat was meant to intimidate Tank into submission, but it crystallized his resolve and made clear this was about more than catching a flight. What happened next would be studied in veterans advocacy courses for years. Tank pulled out his phone and dialed the Congressional Medal of Honor Society's Emergency Advocacy Hotline. "This is Colonel Robert Sullivan, Medal of Honor recipient," he said calmly while Morrison called for security backup. "I'm at Reagan National Airport, and TSA is demanding I remove my Medal of Honor for inspection. I need immediate assistance." The Society representative, retired Admiral James Patterson, responded immediately, "Colonel, do not comply with any demand to remove your decoration. Document everything and stand your ground. I'm contacting the Pentagon and congressional offices right now." Within 15 minutes, Patterson had notified the Secretary of Defense's office, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and Congressman Dan Crenshaw, himself a veteran advocate. The network protecting America's highest heroes began mobilizing with military efficiency. At 3:47 p.m. Eastern Time, exactly 23 minutes after Morrison had first demanded Tank remove his Medal of Honor, her supervisor's phone rang with a call from Pentagon liaisons that would end her career and trigger an unprecedented response. The call came from the Secretary of Defense's Military Personnel Office, carrying authority of officials who viewed discrimination against Medal of Honor recipients as an attack on American values. "This is Colonel Patricia Martinez, calling for Secretary Austin," the voice said with crisp efficiency. "I need to speak with whoever is responsible for the Tank Sullivan incident immediately." Morrison's supervisor took the call, his face growing pale as he listened. The situation had escalated beyond local level. This was now a federal incident being monitored by Pentagon leadership and congressional offices. Within 90 minutes, Reagan National was experiencing something unprecedented, a complete security checkpoint shut down to address the mistreatment of a Medal of Honor recipient. By 5:15 p.m., Reagan National's Terminal A was experiencing its first security shutdown since 9/11. Pentagon representatives had arrived to document the incident. TSA administrators from Washington headquarters were conducting emergency investigation, and Morrison found herself facing immediate suspension while her actions were reviewed. The pressure extended beyond the airport. Military commands were monitoring the situation, veterans organizations were mobilizing legal resources, and congressional offices were demanding explanations for how a war hero could be treated so shamefully by federal employees. Despite high-level intervention, resolving the situation required delicate attention to both justice and policy implications. Tank's treatment had been witnessed by hundreds of passengers, many recording portions of the incident for social media. Federal authorities had to determine whether Morrison's actions constituted policy violations or civil rights infractions. Investigation revealed Morrison's fundamental misunderstanding of TSA protocols and Medal of Honor protections. Her demands violated American security policies, federal laws protecting veterans, and basic standards of respect for military service. The breakthrough came when Brigadier General Robert Hayes, Pentagon liaison for Medal of Honor affairs, arrived personally to oversee resolution. A combat veteran himself, General Hayes understood exactly what Tank experienced and was determined both honor and justice were served. "Colonel Sullivan," he said, approaching with fellow veteran respect, "on behalf of the Department of Defense, I want to personally apologize for the completely unacceptable treatment you received today. Your service and sacrifice deserve our highest respect, not bureaucratic harassment." At 6:23 p.m., exactly 2 hours and 36 minutes after Morrison first confronted him, Tank Sullivan walked through Reagan National Airport, escorted by General Hayes and a military honor detail. TSA agents stood respectfully as they passed, while passengers and airport workers observed in silence. The Medal of Honor that Morrison had tried to treat as a security threat was now being honored at the highest levels of military command. Tank's refusal to be humiliated had evolved into a powerful affirmation of the values his decoration represented: courage, sacrifice, and the principle that some things are too sacred to compromise. General Hayes personally ensured Tank received first-class accommodations on his rescheduled flight, with every crew member briefed about serving one of America's greatest heroes. "Your granddaughter is fortunate to have you," the general told Tank at the gate. "Make sure she understands her grandfather's courage didn't end on the battlefield." Janet Morrison was terminated from federal service within 48 hours and permanently banned from security-related employment. The incident triggered immediate TSA policy reforms, establishing clear protocols for Medal of Honor recipients and mandatory training about America's highest military decorations. Reagan National created expedited processing procedures for all military decoration recipients. The Sullivan Protocol now ensures Medal of Honor recipients receive appropriate respect and accommodation at federal facilities nationwide. Tank's stand against bureaucratic disrespect led to congressional hearings on TSA training and legislation strengthening protections for military decoration recipients. Tank walked his granddaughter down the aisle wearing his Medal of Honor with even greater pride. Sarah's wedding became not just family celebration, but testament to courage that defines the Sullivan legacy. Willingness to stand up for what's right, whether on Vietnam battlefields or in airport terminals where ordinary people must choose between convenience and principle. Sometimes the most important victories are won not through violence, but through simple refusal to let sacred things be treated as ordinary, reminding America that honor once earned can never be taken away by those who fail to understand its value.